reams of newsprint have been documented about the rise of Indra Nooyi to the very top of corporate America, and deservedly so. Indra Nooyi stormed into one of the most coveted corporate boardrooms in the US, and under her watch, between 2006 to 2018, net revenue at PepsiCo jumped 80% to $64 billion. The company returned more than $79 billion in cash to shareholders, and its market cap rose by $57 billion. Her story is unusual and compelling, and is now being recounted in her very own words. In her memoir, My Life in Full, Nooyi not just gives us an honest account of the awe-inspiring milestones she's achieved, but also lays bare the aching loneliness and battles of a young woman trying to find her place in the world. It recounts an immigrant's quest for identity and the challenges of being able to dream big while also being a mother and a caregiver. Nooyi's passion shines through every page as she takes us back to her family home in Chennai, to her days of being part of a rock band and even an opening batswoman for the first women's cricket team in Chennai, to flying out to Yale in 1978 and starting her corporate career. Nooyi tries to tell it like it is, and in telling her story, we realize how hard it still is for women to make it to the top. In sharing her own journey, she makes it clear she doesn't have all the answers, and in fact, there is no one-size-fits-all solution to bridging the gender gap. But there are important lessons for corporations who wish to make a change, and for women and men who seek to live their dreams. Joining me today on this very special edition of Lessons in Leadership is Indra Nooyi, the former chairman and CEO of PepsiCo. Indra Nooyi, what an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us here once again on Lessons in Leadership. It's great to have you back.
Nice to meet you again, Shereen, and it's wonderful to be on the show. Thank you for having me.
Well, I have to say, Ms. Nooyi, I've enjoyed reading the book cover to cover. And, you know, there is so much that we already know about Indra Nooyi, the woman who stormed corporate America, but there's very little that we actually know about the journey of Indra Krishnamurthy and the many changes that you had to make and the many milestones you had to achieve to get to where you did. Let's talk a little bit about that. And, you know, it's fascinating how in many ways, your sister paved the way for what you went on to achieve, whether it was in education or your move to IIM Kolkata or eventually getting a job. Your lessons in teamwork, the first lessons in teamwork you got from your association with the Girl Scouts. I don't know how many people know that you were part of the first women's cricket team in Chennai, or the fact that you actually had a band. You know, how did all of this come about, given the fact that while there was a premium on education in your family, it was still conservative in many ways?
Yeah, so thank you for that, recounting of my entire childhood, Shereen. But you're right. I grew up in a conservative South Indian family, but I grew up in a progressive conservative family, if you can believe that. It's a family where the men believed that the women should be educated and should not be held back because of their gender. My mother felt the same way too, but my father and my grandfather particularly leaned into that and said, I want our granddaughters and daughters to soar. So we were given all the educational opportunities. We were also allowed to experiment and do other things, but within a frame. We were given a very tight set of guardrails and rules and regulations, and as long as we operated within that, we could do anything we wanted. Play cricket, climb trees, fall down, be in a rock band. It had to be under the supervision of the parents. All the rehearsals had to happen at home. So there were regulations and rules like that. But to be honest, the fact that we were allowed to dream, the fact that we were allowed to do whatever we wanted, the fact that we were encouraged, supported, extracurricular activities paid for, I think all of that was just unusual for the time. I often think back and say, I was born 8 years after independence. Think about it. 8 years after India got independence. As a country, India was just discovering itself. Women were just emerging into the scene. And at that time, my grandfather, my father, my mother all decided that the girls in the family were going to get a fantastic chance to be whatever they wanted to be. And you're right. If not for my sister, I don't think I'd be here, because she paved the way in going to IIM Ahmedabad and opened the doors to business, because as a family, we didn't know what business was about. We only knew what government jobs and working in a bank was all about. That's what everybody in our family did. Lawyers, working in a bank, working in government jobs. My sister was the first one to go to IIM Ahmedabad. And once she managed to break down that barrier, I could go into IIM Calcutta too. So in a way, I attribute my CEOship at PepsiCo to her early opening of the doors for, the Krishnamurti family to go do whatever they wanted to do.
You know, and I think we don't fully appreciate the times that you lived in and how hard it must have been for you and for your sister to actually carve your own journeys in the way that you did. And I distinctly remember this paragraph from the book where you talk about the burden on mothers in India, with one foot on the brake to make sure that their daughters were protected and well-mannered, and the other foot on the accelerator to help them gain independence, respect, and power. And while so much has actually changed culturally and economically, this phenomena continues to be something that we have to grapple with and cope with every single day.
That is the unfortunate truth. And I think in our family, as I mentioned, because the men in the family said, we want the women to soar, my mother's the foot on the brake because of societal pressures. You've got to get the girls married at 18. They've got to make a home. They've got to sort of be the homemaker, was offset by the men saying, hey, wait a minute, why? If that's what they want to do, that's okay. But if they want to do something else, let's give them the chance to dream and soar. I think in every family, the mothers these days would like for their daughters to have economic freedom, financial freedom, be what they want to be, because they want their daughters to have what they didn't have. At the same time, they should not be held back by the men. And so I think we're at a time now where men should also lean in and say, why hold back these fantastic women? Why hold back women who want to go to college, who want to be educated, go to professional schools, want to contribute in paid jobs? Why not let them be whatever they want to be? It's good for the family, it's good for the country. And let's see how we can support them in having a family and being a mother also. And I think those discussions have to become central to everything about life in general and in jobs.
As you point out, Ms. Nooyi, that there is plenty of evidence now which makes it amply clear why it serves the corporation and the country at large to have more women in the workplace. And yet, we're not making the kinds of gains that we should be making. In fact, in India, we're seeing the reverse. We're actually seeing a decline in the number of women participating in the workforce, which is a cause for concern. But, why is it that corporations still struggle to put in place mechanisms that will allow for women to continue post-maternity? I mean, you talk honestly about instances within the book, including spending $2 million at PepsiCo to renovate one of the corporate floors so that you could convert that into a facility for childcare. Why is it that the obvious choices are not being made by corporations even today?
Well, it's got to be a coming together of corporations, communities, societies, governments. Corporations can't do it themselves because maybe big companies can do it, but small and medium companies will have a tough time doing it because they don't have enough employees to justify an on-site childcare. So this is not a single entity responsibility. It's a bunch of people coming together to help society. But let me step back from this. I think even though women are making progress in society, in the business world, in the paid work world, if you want to call it, men still hold many of the positions of power. There are a lot of men who are coming to the table and saying, hey, we've got to provide a framework to help young family builders, help young women and women in general, sort of juggle family and work. We've got to provide the framework for that. I was reading something fantastic about Tata Consumer Products, all the support they're providing young family builders and women. I think taking those best practices and spreading it around to other companies and saying it can be done. And then really bringing all the men in power, at least a critical mass of men in power, to the table and saying what can be done together. If the big family homes, the family-owned companies in India could come together and start something like this, that would be a fantastic example for all of the companies to start thinking about doing this alone or in cooperation with others. Because if a bunch of small and medium-sized companies got together and set up a childcare facility in the place where they're all located, would be a big benefit. But I think the time has come to make this discussion front and center, as opposed to making it sort of a fringe discussion, which happens after everybody discusses how to make money and technology and flying to Mars. I think the time has come to make family and children and women central to the discussions on work and our future.
Does it concern you that we have more conversations about how to get to Mars and fly rocket ships than address a serious issue like this one?
It surprises me more than anything else, because I'm not against going to Mars. Believe me, there's a space war going on too. I'm not against that. But all that I'm saying is, unless we have families, unless we have kids, unless we have everybody who's talented in the workforce, we're not going to have enough people to do all the work to get us to Mars and back. We're not going to have enough nurses, teachers, caregivers. We're just not going to have enough software programmers. So I'm being very pragmatic and practical here, saying we're not thinking here like a feminist, we're thinking like an economist. And we're not thinking just about female, we're thinking about families. So if you think as an economist and you think about families, the time has come to make these conversations central to our conversations on future of work.
And one of the other important issues that you focus on, and you call it as a focus area as far as your next act in life is concerned, is really creating and nurturing the care industry. And again, it would seem like an obvious thing and an obvious choice, but it's not part of the mainstream conversation in any form or fashion.
I don't know why, because one of the things I discovered, much to my surprise, India has extremely progressive laws when it comes to women and treatment of women and maternity care and leave that's on the books. So India is ahead of many, many countries in those laws. But the practical example, the practical numbers say a different story, because women are 10 times more likely to do more work at home than men. Women are getting a lot of the college degrees, but they're not represented in the halls of a business. More women are dropping out of the workforce. So I think we have to sit down and ask ourselves, why is it we have such great laws on the book, but the evidence is not there in the places of work? Are there issues holding us back? Is there a family dynamic holding people back? If television shows are any indication of what goes on, I think we are making a lot of progress as a country. India is making a lot of progress as a country, but I still think there are many barriers, either at work or the family structure, that need to be overcome.
Let me move away from India and go back in time to talk a little bit about your own journey. And, while reading the book, it struck me that you had no access to phones, you had no access to technology, there was no WhatsApp, FaceTime. And when you boarded that flight to the US to join Yale in 1978, what a leap of faith that must have been, not just for you, but for your parents, for your mother in specific, to let you go.
I think my parents outwardly showed support, outwardly were cheerful when they saw me off, but later on, they said that after I boarded the plane and the plane took off, they cried in private, because it was a tough thing for them to see a daughter fly so many miles away at a point when flying between India and the US was not that easy. I mean, you had to get all kinds of permissions to get $500 to even leave the country. And tickets were very expensive relative to family incomes. And so, they wondered when I'll be back, wondered when they'd talk to me. And, telephone calls cost a lot of money, so I'd only call them once a week. And I had to count the pennies very carefully. And so it was very, very tough. But I think they struggled with it. For me, it was like an adventure. So I was going to something much more exciting. It was going to open up a whole new vista for me. I missed them incredibly. But for me, it was something to look forward to. For them, it was losing a child to a faraway country. They didn't know when they were going to have that child come back again or be with them or visit with them. And so I think they struggled a lot with my departure.
But it wasn't easy for you either at the beginning, because there was a loss of identity. You were trying very hard to fit in. I remember an anecdote where you were going for your first interview for your internship and you bought a blue suit and orange suede shoes and ended up feeling miserable at the interview.
I think that's par for the course, because in those days, you didn't have support structures where people helped, taught you how to dress, helped you shop, maybe even gave you used clothes. That system didn't exist then. And also, even if it did exist, I was too embarrassed to ask for that help. And so I was trying to do it all myself, because I didn't want anybody to see how desperately unqualified I was for performing like an equal in the society there. And so, I went to a local Kmart and bought myself what I thought were fancy clothes, but they were dreadful. They didn't fit, they were ugly, they were mismatched. Everything that could go wrong with that outfit went wrong. But at the end of the day, you know, I never let the clothes define who I was. Even though I didn't feel good, I went in there saying, I'm just going to do a good job at the interview because that's all I have left. My education, my knowledge, my self-respect. I'm just going to sit up straight, answer the questions. And if I don't get the job, that's okay. I'm going to have to do better the next job, the next job interview. So, here's the amazing thing, Shereen. I dressed terribly. I went into that meeting knowing that everybody was laughing at how I looked. Yet, at the end of the day, when that company finished all its interviews and had to offer 2 summer internships, I was one of the people that was offered a job. So clearly, I must have done something right at the interviews, said the right things, talked about what I wanted to do with the company or the issues they put in front of me. But most importantly, they did not disqualify me because of the way I looked or the way I dressed. So I give enormous credit to the system that I was a part of then, a meritocracy that valued me for who I was as opposed to the package that I was.
And it was the same when you were attempting to get a job here in India. And I remember in the book you said, I held my own against all the men, even though they tried to talk over me, interrupt me, but I never gave in. And that's pretty much a running theme through the course of the book. Your ability to just stay the course and not give in no matter what.
Well, that was a comment made by S.L. Rao, who was the head of marketing for Metro Beardsell when he hired me. When I asked him later on, Surendra, you had so many people you could hire from. Why did you pick me? He said, all the men were out to talk over you and sort of muscle you out. And there you are, just holding your own and making your points. And the fact that he noticed that and the fact that he gave that a lot of points was amazing. And when he said that, I realized that I had to face odds throughout my entire life. But I think at the end of the day, if you have the core skills, if you're competent, you can allow that to shine through. But if you don't have the core skills and the competence to show up and make your points and be heard, nothing can take the place of competence. Nothing. So competence builds confidence. That's why I always worry when you strip somebody's confidence, you start to strip away their competence. So in my case, I used competence to build my confidence.
It's interesting that you talk about competence and confidence, but women are constantly being judged, constantly being scrutinized, evaluated. You talk about sitting at the Pepsi boardroom and asking questions and being passed over, saying that that's a theoretical question. So it's not as if it got easier as you move to the top. And that continues to be a problem that women face across, not just within boardrooms, but across different aspects of their lives. Almost this sort of dismissive attitude and the need to have to constantly try and prove ourselves. What do you say to young women who are watching you today, Indra Nooyi? How did you deal with it then? What would you say we need to focus on today?
So let me give you the good news and the bad news. The good news is that there is progress because there are more women coming into the halls of power, more women ascending to the top. So that's the good news. The bad news is that they're still fighting and clawing their way up. And I think 2 things need to happen. One is that the culture of companies has to change, where the people in the seats of power, men and women, when they notice any behavior that goes against anybody, leave alone a woman or somebody who's diverse, you've got to stop it right there. Don't make a note and say, I'll talk to the person later on. Stop it right there. Stop the meeting and say, explain to me why you're talking over this person. Why don't you let them finish? Why do you roll your eyes when they talk? Why are you whispering and having a sidebar conversation when she's talking? So you've got to nip the issue in the bud. Because if you did that, people will realize that this is not a behavior that people condone. So that's the first one. Second, I think there's strength in numbers. More women, diverse people that enter the workforce. If people see bad behavior, we have to support each other. I always talk about the sisterhood of women. We have to find a way to together speak up about these issues. Because if we all sit silent saying, I'm going to keep my head low. After all, she got thrown under the bus. That's not a good thing. I think the sisterhood has to get stronger, and the people in power, men and women, have to set the tone at the top to make sure that bad behavior is not condoned, that bad behavior is called out immediately, and then follow it up with some training on why is it this was bad behavior. Many people act in ways that are inappropriate without even realizing they're doing that. So I think you've got to model the right behavior and give it a little bit of time for the right behavior to take root. But Shereen, one thing is very important. You can't do all this unless you have a critical mass of women in the workforce. So we have to make all the effort to bring a critical mass of women into the workforce and nurture them and develop them, because women are wicked smart. Women really want to contribute. They are doing exceedingly well in schools and colleges. Talent is the competitive advantage of nations. Why are we holding back this talent? I think that's what we ought to ask ourselves as a major question. Why do we believe women's unbelievable talents are not as important as other people's unbelievable talents? Why can't we put them on an equal footing and evaluate them, nurture them, develop them, and allow them to fly? That's the question we should ask ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that is a question that each one of us must ensure that we find answers to and find ways around making, an equal opportunity workplace a reality. But Indra, I want to talk about this issue. And you say in the book that our systems put the career clock and the female biological clock in direct conflict. And this is a conflict that women across the world, not just here in India, but across the world, face every day to make a choice between motherhood or a career. And I know that it wasn't easy for you either, but at the start, when you had your first daughter, you said that it wasn't an option. You needed both incomes, and so you had to go to work. But you did have these questions the second time around. So how do we address this issue? How do we address this challenge? Because it's not an easy one. I mean, they say that it takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a village to ensure that a woman stays on at work.
So, this is not even a balance issue, it's a juggling issue. I think that all the evidence points to the fact that when women and men, both, people in the family go to work, family incomes improve, both of them get retirement benefits. So later on in life, they have enough of a nest egg to fall back on. An educated woman actually helps the kid. And it also says that children in organized childcare are taken care of by somebody who knows how to nurture and develop a kid actually yields a better kid. So, the evidence is there to support women working and for organized childcare. So I sit here and go, when we need the best and brightest in the country, that includes men and women, people are highly educated, have all the right degrees that we need for the future of any country, why can't we create support structures to help young family builders have a family, create a family and nurture it and engage in paid work? Why do we say that the woman has to drop out? Or if the woman does not drop out, why do we load so much guilt on her that she can't live with the stresses of all the guilt that's loaded on her? Herein comes a big advantage of the Indian family structure. I benefited because of multi-generational living. I benefited because my mother, my in-laws, everybody helped out with childcare. And they didn't do it because we asked them to do it. They did it willingly. They said, we want you to keep your job. We want you to go out and work because that's what makes you a full person. Go ahead, dream, do whatever you want. And we will help you take care of your children. And they were willing helpers in this whole process. And I credit a lot of my success to them too, because without that support that they gave willingly, I couldn't have gone off and, had a job which required travel, which required long hours. I couldn't have done it. With no technology, I couldn't have done it. So I think in our Indian family structure, we have to think through how we can have some intergenerational responsibility without the burdens of multi-generational living. How do we make it happen? So that we have some sort of a care system that's set up, support from the family, and lower the guilt levels on women. Don't put so much pressure on them that the stress of having a family just overwhelms them so that they say, don't want to have a family, or I'm going to delay having a family so much that I'm just going to have one kid. even if they want to have more, they just don't want to do it because the pressures are too much. So I think it's an interesting time in our evolution where it's time to pause and think about all this in the context of the future of families, the future of work, the future of our civilizations. We should think about all of that. Look, all this time, India has enjoyed a demographic dividend, a young population. We need the young population to take care of the aging, to pay into all these social security programs or the equivalent in India that support the older people, pension programs, whatever. We need young people for many, many jobs. So let's not forget the importance of young people.
You know, you talked about this overwhelming guilt, and it's a guilt that's thrust on women. Are you good enough mothers? Have you been good enough at work? Are you good enough caregivers? How did you deal with that? Because as you point out, it's not easy, and this business of can you have it all? I don't believe you can have it all at any given point in time. How did you deal with that? What was your coping mechanism of dealing with the regret and the guilt?
I think life is about trade-offs, Shereen. I mean, we are making trade-offs every hour of the day. All of us, in some shape or form, whether we have children or not, in some way we are making a trade-off. Should I do this or this? If you did A and not B, you feel guilty that you couldn't do A and B. So our whole life is about trade-offs. And with it comes guilt. Except when you have families, you're also dealing with young children, maybe aging parents, and the guilt level goes up. In my case, I'm telling you, if I could make a T-shirt for myself, I'd say full of guilt. But that's okay, Guilt is par for the course. And because I want to be great at
what do you feel most guilty of?
Everything, I want to be perfect at everything. I want to be the best mom, the best wife, the best daughter, the best daughter-in-law, the best executive. It doesn't work. There's only 24 hours in a day, and every one of these are full-time jobs. And the CEO job is a 3 full-time job kind of a schedule. So I know I can't be great at everything. So at every point in time, I'm making trade-offs. What do I want to focus on? And whatever I don't do, I go, oh my God, should I have given more time to that? But that's just me, because many of us have got something called a perfectionist gene that's inherent in all of us. And we want to be very good at everything. And that's what makes us all very special. But with the perfection gene comes guilt. So my point is, let guilt be part of us. At some point, you drop it like I did about 5 years ago. But guilt overwhelmed me all the time. But big deal. If I had not worked, I'd have felt guilty for not working. I'd have been resentful. I was guilty. I didn't spend enough time with the kids, but I spent more quality time with the kids than many other parents did. So you know what? At the end of the day, you will drop all that guilt and get comfortable with your decisions, which is where I am. But when you're going through the process, all of us are bundles of guilt, gene pools of guilt. Just live with it.
Yes, you have to learn to live with it, as you point out. But, one of the other issues that I want to talk to you about is really the immigrants' fear, the immigrants' loss of identity, search for identity. And you talk about that in the book. You say that I felt like a guest in this country and I wanted to be viewed as an upright person, a contributor, and not a liability. How long before did you start to really feel comfortable with who you were, where you were, in that search for a new identity for yourself?
I mentioned in the book, I was not fleeing persecution. I wasn't fleeing a bad situation. I went to the United States I came to the United States because it was a place of hope and dreams and innovation and entrepreneurship and cultural movements. I came to the US because I was absolutely enthralled and enamored with this country. And once I came here and I settled here and I became a citizen, I wanted to make sure that I was an upright citizen. I was a contributor to this country that welcomed me. I say this in the introduction, Shereen. My journey and my ascent to the top of my iconic company, I honestly believe could have happened only in the United States. So for a country that welcomed me, supported me, so many mentors showed up throughout my entire life here in the United States, lifted me and promoted me, I felt I owed everybody a debt of gratitude. That was enabled because they were all products of the culture here in the US. So it took me about a decade to get completely comfortable. But I must say, even now I'd maintain that my journey would have been possible only in the United States. And I am very grateful to the country for that.
Living the American dream. But I want to ask you what you make of the fact that we're seeing so many CEOs of Indian origin leading top companies. I mean, you were one of the first, but today, so many of the tech companies have CEOs of Indian origin who didn't grow up in the US. They're products of the Indian education system, which is criticized very often, but yet they've gone through this education system and made it to the top there. How do you explain that? Why do you think we're seeing that happen? What's unique? What's special?
Okay. Let's be clear. Most of the criticism I've heard about the Indian education system is the unevenness in the education system. The top schools in India are still among the best in the world, no question about it. It's just that the curve doesn't look balanced. What needs to happen in the Indian education system is lifting those schools that are not in the top 10% or 15% and create great educational opportunities for everybody as opposed to a select few. Now, given the country's large size, people who go to the top schools go through a self-selection process because they are the best grade getters, they've had all the opportunities in life, they do phenomenally well in IIT or whatever entrance exams, and the country selects the best and the brightest. And then because there's not enough opportunities for them in India, they come to the United States. And they do extraordinarily well because they don't have a language barrier. They've already been selected among a very select group of people to be the tippy top. And they're welcomed in the United States. So it's a brain drain from India. And so I think today the situation is changing. More people are going back and contributing to India and staying in India. But I'd say the 70s, 80s, and even in the early 90s, the net brain drain out of India was significant. And I think it's that cohort group that's come in and ascended to positions of power here in the US, largely in tech companies, because they started their career in tech companies, they were educated in the best technology institutions, and then they ascended to the top. And so I'm not surprised, but I think the reverse is true. India has to find a way to keep its best and brightest. Because when you go to an IIT, for example, you are a whiz kid in the technology field. So how does the country keep these extraordinary brains?
Let me ask you about that. You've, of course, been an investor in India through your stint at PepsiCo. You were here in India very often. What do you believe is the need of the hour today as the economy looks at self-reliance, at the same time looking at drawing in foreign direct investment? Some see this as contradictory. Others believe that this can be a happy convergence. But how do you see where things currently stand on the economic front today? And what would you like to see being prioritized?
Look, the pandemic has showed us that being self-reliant in critical areas is important, but also having FDI in areas that India doesn't have the technology for or doesn't have the capability to develop is also important. The question is developing a blueprint and a plan for the right combination of industries for self-reliance and FDI. And making sure that when FDI comes in, you nurture and protect and allow it to thrive, because otherwise others are not going to come in with the power of the purse. So I think India needs to thread the needle very carefully in figuring out what are the critical industries India wants to be self-reliant with. I mean, the great news is in vaccines, India is self-reliant. Antibiotics, India is self-reliant. What are the other critical technologies? Because it's very hard to whipsaw and say, I'm going to allow FDI or imports in this area. All of a sudden, overnight, I'm going to be self-reliant. That's not good for both parties. So I think it's having a clear blueprint of industries and sectors. You want homegrown or made in India versus where you think FDI can benefit the country. And that requires, government intervention and government planning. And I think India, in the history of the country, has been very good at, long-term planning to decide what sectors they want to invest in. And then once you encourage FDI, you've got to have a consistent policy because FDI comes in for the long term. So you've got to make sure that you don't whipsaw all of the multinationals and the foreign direct investors that come in so that they sour on India. Because India is still one of the most desirable markets in the world. Its size, its demographic dividend makes it a very, very attractive market. We've got to get more FDI in and critical future-oriented industries.
Yeah, and policy predictability is going to be key to that. But let me ask you about the lessons that we've learned through the COVID pandemic. In the 18 months that we've been through, there's been a lot of disruption, but there's also been a lot of learning. The kind of flexibility that we've now seen with work from home, remote learning, what does this mean in terms of a more gender-balanced recovery? Do you believe that we are likely to see a much more gender-balanced recovery as we move through this because these new models have at least gotten validation through the last 18 months?
I hope so. I think one of the greatest things that happened during COVID was technology was developed so rapidly in the area of Zoom, Teams, Chime, all of these remote working technologies. They progressed. And if I look at some of the new ideas coming, it's even more exciting, applying, virtual reality. How do you bring the person into the room? So I think that we're going to see a lot more technological innovation happening in this whole teleconferencing area. And if that happens, you are going to allow people, or you're going to enable people to decide when they want to come into the office and when they want to work from home. Now, herein lies the problem. If we're not clear about the rules for hybrid working or remote working, we'll end up with two classes of citizens. People who come to work and people who stay home. And people who come to work get rewarded. People who don't come to work, even if they deliver, are not rewarded. And this might exacerbate the inequalities between men and women. So I think it's very important that companies have an honest conversation about when do you want people in the office? When do you want them to when do you want to allow them to work from home? And couples have to sit down and say, this week I'll go in 2 days, next week you go in 2 days. So we've got to figure out how those conversations happen, because with flexibility in work hours comes better management of the family. With remote working comes better management of children and family building. The other problem I'm worried about is the front line doesn't have the ability to be flexible, doesn't have the ability to work from home. A caregiver, a nurse, a doctor, a teacher, frontline workers like people who work in retail, they have to be in the job all the time. So we have to be careful that we don't take that group of people and not give them the support structure to be always on, while we worry just about the white-collar workers who can work from their homes, not have to go through commuting, and we worry about how to elevate them. So we have to make sure we look at all parts of society, not just one group, that to a small group.
I want to spend a little bit of time talking to you about your partner and how important that is, Indra Nooyi, in your journey and the journeys of many women who are attempting to build a career for themselves. I mean, did you have a conversation before you got married? I know you got engaged while the two of you were in the US, and your parents actually on both sides did the engagement back in India, and you weren't physically there. But and there is still, I understand, a debate about who proposed to whom first. But outside of that, did you have a real conversation on what you imagined, future to be together?
It was interesting. In writing this book, we sat down and talked about this. We both knew we were going to work because we both met when we were in graduate schools, okay? And he had just started a job and he wanted to go on and get his MBA, and I was graduating from Yale. So it was assumed that both of us were going to work. And that's how we started life, and that's how we've lived our life. And when we did have Preeta, our first daughter, unfortunately, my father had just passed away. And my mother said, look, I'll help out. And my mother was very young at that time. And so my mother was an invaluable help. But where I was lucky was my in-laws stepping in and saying, we don't want you to quit your job. My father-in-law in particular was crystal clear. He said, I want you to keep working and we will help you. My father-in-law and mother-in-law came to help. My aunt-in-law, she came to help. I mean, this is the kind of support we had from the extended family, and all because they loved their son, nephew, whatever. And he believed that the two of us were going to work and create a family here together. Remember, we came here with nothing. We both were immigrants. We didn't want to have debts. We wanted our children, our child first and then the second child, to have enough so that they didn't have to struggle like we did when we came here. And so with those noble intentions, we went about working. And the conversation between us was always about how we're going to build a support structure to take care of our kids. Combination of families, childcare, and whatever else structure we could find. So we worked hard at it. There was never a time when we said, you quit or I quit. Raj did take some time off to go take care of his dad when his dad was sick. But, that was something that's spectacular what he did. He's a very, very, very good son. But beyond that, we never talked about quitting the jobs or sitting at home. Both of us love to work. We love to expand our horizons. Why not?
Absolutely, why not? Indra Nooyi, what's next now as far as you're concerned? I don't know how many people know this, but you're a part of the ICC. You played cricket while you were in college, and that continues to be a big passion for you. What about a completely different pitch? Are you willing to bat on the political pitch at all?
No, that's just not me. I have great admiration for people in politics because it's such a tough job having to build support through coalitions, and it's just a tough job, and that's just not me. I'm used to the corporate world where there's more command and control and getting stuff done as fast as possible. That's not the political environment, so that's not where I'm going to play. My life is pretty rich these days. I sit on the boards of Amazon and Philips. I sit on the board of Memorial Sloan Kettering, ICC. I teach up at the U.S. Military Academy in West Point, something I love very much. And then I advise a whole bunch of small companies who are going to make their mark in the field of food and beverage and phytochemicals and bioactive peptides and artificial intelligence. So I have a truly lovely time today doing all these things that I couldn't do when I was in PepsiCo because I had to focus just on the company. Yeah. And I'm going to devote myself to what's next from my book. I really want to convene people who are working in this whole care equation. A lot of people have done the work to figure out how to set up the system. They've scored it. They've created structures on paper. So I want to bring all those people together and say, how do we move this discussion and debate forward? And I hope people in India do the same. I'll do my best to facilitate it, but I hope people in India do the same because we've now reached a point where families are a source of stress for young people when they should be a source of strength. Yeah. And we have to make sure that we support young family builders, especially women, both to have families and to engage in paid work. And that's our focus. That's our focus, young family builders and women. We want to support the two of them. We better come together and take some action. And my hope is that we can call for a care convention in India also. And together we can talk about how can we move this agenda forward.
It is an important agenda that needs to be moved forward. But, Indra, you spoke about sitting on the boards of companies like Amazon and Philips today. And you've for long been a believer in the idea of sustainable capitalism. You moved on the principles of performance and purpose at PepsiCo. As you look at where the world is today, and, every time we go through a period of churn and a period of crisis, this conversation around stakeholder capitalism comes back to the forefront, but often we forget the real lessons. How are you viewing where things currently stand? What do we need to do to reclaim capitalism from the capitalists today?
Capitalism is great because it encourages thinking, entrepreneurship, innovation, invention. It's less bureaucracy. There's so much good about capitalism. But capitalism, which does not take into account society as a whole, that doesn't take into account the needs of everybody in society and benefits just a few, is not a very good thing. And so we're at a point in life a point in the evolution of society where we may want to rethink parts of how capitalism has evolved and sort of tweak it at the edges. And, when I articulated performance with purpose way back in 2006, it was considered, oh my God, she's not focused on shareholder value. She's talking about corporate social responsibility. I wasn't talking about giving away money that we earn. I was talking about changing the way we made money. I was talking about how can PepsiCo make money in a way that future-proofs our company, that takes into account the changing societal needs of the future. That's what I was focused on. People didn't realize that. And so I was subject to a lot of criticism, but I held my ground. Now, the notion of performance with purpose in different words is becoming part of corporate lexicon. The Business Roundtable 2 years ago signed a statement by 80 CEOs subscribing to this notion of purpose, which goes to the stakeholder theory. Now, the pandemic, of course, has caused some companies to move forward, others not. But as the pandemic passes us by, I think we have to stop and ask ourselves, what does it mean to be stakeholder focused? What are all these ESG metrics people are talking about? How do we stop focusing on 100 metrics which don't mean anything and focus on the vital 10 for our company or our industry so that we don't pass costs on to society? Okay? And really think about how can companies with their size and scope and scale and their capabilities be a force for good in every society and community that they're part of? That's the conversation that needs to be had in this new version of capitalism. And I hope I'm seeing companies beginning to have this conversation. I think we just need to make sure that they don't back off this conversation. Now, here is the sad part. I saw more progress when there was external pressure on companies to have this kind of conversation inside their four walls. I hope that external pressure continues. Because if you back off the external pressure, companies will go right back to where they were.
And we hope that with the focus on ESG metrics, the pressure will continue. But Indra Nooyi, the New York Yankees or the Indian cricket team?
Look, at this point, now that we're coming into deciding who's going to go to the playoffs, I'm all in for the New York Yankees. Right after that, I'll switch my attention to the World Cup and the Cricket World Cup. And I'll head out to Dubai to see the finals.
I am going to try and get you to end this conversation by singing for us, if you will. And again, you know, you did that for 3 years of your life while you were in school. You were part of a band. A song that sums up your life.
No way. I mean, look, my singing days are behind me. My singing days are behind me. You know what? Those days were great days. Now I'm a bathroom singer. So this is a public television program. I'm not going to make a fool of myself again.
Okay, don't sing it, but a song that sums up Indra Nooyi and the journey that you've made.
I did it my way.
Absolutely, Indra Nooyi. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks very much for your time. We wish you all the very best of luck as you start the next act of your life. And we do hope that the conversations that we should be having on things like care, as well as sustainable capitalism, take center stage. Thanks, as always, for your time.
Thanks, Shereen. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
With that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of Lessons in Leadership from all of us here. For now, goodbye. Many thanks for watching.